There is no safety at all for journalists in Gaza. This is something that we can witness in the number of casualties among journalists and paramedics and doctors, and it's terrifying. Wearing a helmet with vest written press on it, it's just another crosshair on you that you could be targeted because of it.
True.
So it's devastating, it's appalling. I've actually reconsidered everything about journalism. It's not about my safety, but it's more than about the safety of my family, because I know if they intend to target me, as they did to many colleagues, it's not they will target me alone. They will target me with other, tens and potentially hundreds in each house, because we've been crammed into the city of Rafah, my city, because of the Israeli evacuation orders. Because it becomes absurd at that point to realize that my work, my voice, my professionalism, my so-called neutrality means nothing in the face of the Israeli policies of constant targeting of journalists, for example. So when everything turned in a bad way when it comes to when it comes to being a journalist, I turned out to just writing everything in my notes, just documenting. And this is an advice of my beloved friend Rafat Al-Arir. He used to tell me, just write everything. You might have a good memory now, but days will pass.
Yeah.
More will happen, and you will forget. So following his advice, I started to document everything. And it turned out, when I looked into my draft afterwards, I've discovered I've written more than 20,000 words.
Oh.
So it is something. In this war, it's been just on another level. It's just something even the language fails to describe. Even with all the capacity of terminology that we have, I don't think there are proper descriptions for what we have seen. What everybody has seen taking place in Gaza.
Welcome back to Palestinian, the world's first Palestinian-led podcast dedicated to examining the gender dynamics of Israeli violence in Palestine. Today's guest is Issam Adwan, a Palestinian researcher, genocide survivor, and a journalist from Gaza. His work has spans international media, grassroots activism, and also academic inquiry. He has worked as a journalist for international media outlets, including the Associated Press, Al Jazeera English, and he has been in the forefront of reporting and conducting investigative reports within times of a crisis, including the Israeli genocide over Gaza. In today's conversation, we will delve into his experience and into the most difficult interviews and investigative reports he has made in Gaza. And we will also think and talk about how his responsibility and the emotional and, the ethical toll of being a Palestinian journalist, but at the same time, a father and a person who's witnessing the genocide of Gaza. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Thanks. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience in Gaza as a journalist, as a son, as a husband and a father? How did you manage to, be at the same time someone who's living the story, but also surviving it, and at the same time writing about it at the same exact time?
Yeah, I think my story is not very different from any other civilian in Gaza, I would say. I was born and lived almost my entire life in Gaza. I have witnessed various phases of first the Israeli occupation of Gaza, then more than 18 years of blockade after the Israeli disengagement plan. Being, and surviving in Gaza is just brutally difficult. You have to keep your mind straight of surviving each day and the other. I got my education, I got everything that I've known in life because I lived in Gaza, through education, through hard work, through being in various journalistic experiences and human rights documentation experiences. I basically studied my master's at the Islamic University of Gaza, and then I worked with a youth-led initiative named We're Not Numbers, and as the name, it represents the human story behind the headlines, the numbers that the reader or listener usually confront in the media platforms and agencies, we tried in We're Not Numbers to give a sense of the human stories behind these. And throughout these years, I have learned something essential, that it does not really require much of understanding of politics and history to understand the Palestinians, but it requires a human sympathy, a human common sense as well. So throughout these years, I basically I studied my bachelor in English language and teaching methods, but in the aftermath of 2014 war on Gaza, I started to realize, because basically I do have the access of the language and the networks of those who are ready to listen. I thought it's a matter of a responsibility that I have to speak with this language to those who are ready to listen about Palestine and about the situation in Gaza. There is like a common saying about Gaza at that point, that it's like a dark hole. There is no news coming out of it, and most of the news coming out of that 365 square kilometers, they're basically mostly manipulated news or manifestation of Gazans as terrorists or as utterly victims.
Yeah.
But I've throughout these years, I learned in a hard way that there is a huge missing aspect in these stories, the human aspect, just to see the Gazans or the Palestinians as humans. It's as simple, as naive as this. That's why I joined We're Not Numbers in the first place, and I made like a diverted path from education and teaching English at UNRWA schools, and I started to pursue more of a journalistic career. Basically, I started from We're Not Numbers to being platformed to different media agencies and channels in each assault on Gaza. I was regularly called for, to give an opinion and an experience, a testimony, probably. And through this, I was hired by Al Jazeera English as a TV correspondent. Then I was also later on hired by the Associated Press as Gaza's reporter. It's just to sum up these these long years of life in Gaza, which I somehow miss, because now I am not in Gaza. I'm not among my family. The rest of the family members trapped currently in Gaza. To sum up, it's a life indeed full of paradox. Despite the occupation, despite the blockade, it is still something part of me. This sense of life, which turned, because I was born and raised there, could be a normal life to me, which is not to the people, and I used to call them the outside world. So these years have taught me a lot about myself, about others as well. And that's why I decided to dedicate the rest of my life in order to bridge these gaps of understandings about what is known about being a Palestinian, what is known about being a Gazan, what is currently taking place in Gaza, for instance. That's why I try to dedicate everything in my life, even through my PhD right now. I'm also trying to shed the light on certain aspects of life in Gaza. Being on the aspect of being a father, being a son, it's also full of paradoxes. It's filled with joy, yes, indeed, but it's also filled with fears that in each day you can imagine a nightmare could take place. Your family could be targeted, your relative could be targeted. You can miss somebody, a friend, a colleague, a neighbor. It happened. It's not just a nightmare. It's not just a fantasy or an imagination. It happened times I've actually, as the rest of the Gazans, I've indeed lost counting. It's so unfortunate to put like more than 2 million of people in such a small place, and they have been in years and years of violence, and in each house, in each home, in each family, you can find some of them are missing because of the constant violence and wars taking place over and over again. And through these wars, I've worked basically during the Great March of Return of 2018 to 2020. I've seen things firsthand. I've seen lives taken away, and young men lives cut short. Those who deserve to have a life, they were basically fathers or sons, used to go there to protest peacefully to demand the rights of their right of return. And it was I used to these scenes, seeing them on TV in the news, but once I decided to be a reporter and a journalist, I tend to see them firsthand, and this kind of like scenes, they never leave you, and you never just get used to them. It's more than that. They at some point they became part of you, part of your identity, part of your nightmare, part of your life, and part of also the responsibility that lay on your shoulders, that you survive this, and you do have the responsibility to speak on these lives cut short and on these voices went missing because of the constant violence. So yeah, it's a life full of paradox, but it's indeed part of the identity that I'll be eternally grateful for and proud to be.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I remember that you wrote about the massacre of Tailandi restaurant in Gaza. You wrote about the story of the coffee boy and the story of the two girls who were like celebrating with a pizza, and like so many other stories. So why did you feel that those stories are in need of being heard? Specifically, that we don't usually see those stories on media outlets and all of that. So why did you feel the urgency of preserving those stories?
Yeah, I think it started with not only my experience with journalism, but also my entire life, seeing how the Gazans are being treated, and how they are being written about in the news. Slowly, I became to realize the urgency of the human aspects in each story, and each story deserves to be written about and deserves to be remembered, because these people, they had lives.
Yeah.
And that's why I thought throughout this particular war, and after I confronted a lot of emotional burden when it comes to being a journalist, I realized that I want to devote my time to more meaningful, purpose. It's just writing stories. Even if I don't publish them, I'll just have to keep my notes. It somehow helped me to keep my sanity towards what is going on, and to try to distract my mind, not to think that this is a story that I'm writing about. It could be my family next, the rest of the family in Gaza. So I tried to write about everything that I have confronted throughout my reporting in Gaza. Since the start of the war, I tried to give like the reader the frame of what I have seen, what I have smelled, what I have heard, what I have felt in these narratives, and not about me myself, but also in conversations with others and throughout the interviews or small chats. So when the war started, it started like this. When the war started, despite my experience that should have aided me to handle the gruesome scenes of, mangled bodies, shattered bodies of children, of women, of young men, of elderly, in the aftermath of the Israeli airstrikes, I worked at Al-Shifa hospital for 5 days at the beginning of the war. So we basically receive the casualties firsthand in the emergency department. And through these talks, I felt a lot is missing. I hear the trembling in the voice. I hear the agony and the loss. I hear the pain beneath their skin, and I see the all these emotions. Even to me, with this experience, I couldn't deal with these.
Yeah.
It was very, very, very overwhelming, to the extent sometimes I needed a break just to cry or just to sit silent, trying to give myself the space and the power to continue this work. I thought before this war, I thought that I have seen enough. I have documented enough. And could be like the level of how awful the situation is, of how gruesome these scenes are. But in this war, it's been just on another level. It's just something even the language fails to describe. Even with all the capacity of terminology that we have, I don't think there are proper descriptions for what we have seen,
All the
what
horrors.
everybody has seen taking place in Gaza. So with each day passing, I felt this burden is growing somehow, and then emotionally speaking, I needed a solution to deal with it. So when everything turned in a bad way when it comes to when it comes to being a journalist, I turned out to just writing everything in my notes, just documenting. And this is an advice of my beloved friend Rafat Al-Arir. He used to tell me, just write everything. You might have a good memory now, but days will pass.
Yeah.
More will happen, and you will forget. So following his advice, I started to document everything. And it turned out when I looked into my draft afterwards, I've discovered I've written more than like 20,000 words.
Oh.
So it is something. So I decided at that point, because I was working on a book before the war, trying to give the hopeful side, trying to write about the hopeful, the loving sides of life in Gaza. But this war has shifted everything in our lives. So I decided just to dedicate my time, my effort to writing about the situation in Gaza. So in each story that I reported on for the Associated Press, for example, and afterwards for other media platforms, when the editors do not take part of these stories, some of these are understandable, because you can't just write a story of 3,000 words. You can't just get that published. It has to be trimmed down to 1,200 maximum. So I kept all the notes to myself, and I thought at some point I would like to, if for those who care, I would like to keep it as it is. I don't want to remove any part of these stories. I want to get to the reader as close as I should, as a writer,
To show
and
the
for
whole
them
story. Yeah.
to get them as close as they should as humans to understand. So I just kept writing. I didn't care about the number of pages. I didn't care about the number of words in each story. Some of these stories tend to be like 7,000 words, 6,000 words. And part of these, like, as you said, the Al-Tailandi restaurant, a restaurant that I believe every Gazan loves. We have memories there of our families having, lunch and dinner. So when I've heard about the airstrike on the Tailandi restaurant, it's also personal. It's a place that I loved. And I looked at the scenes in the aftermath of some of the journalists publishing, and I've seen in these videos a coffee boy laid on his back, pool of blood beneath him, and he's still holding into his pot some of the paper cups spread around. Another girl was laid. Apparently, she was killed as well. And reading all the reports in the aftermath. So I just wanted to start writing. I started to contact some of the friends in Gaza, telling them I need to identify the coffee boy. I need to identify the other aspects of the stories that I have selected at that point. It's just devastating. Why? Because a few journalists actually cared enough to write about the coffee boy, for instance.
Yeah.
So it pained me that his story is somehow relevant to the media.
Oh, we saw the pictures only. We had no information about him.
Yeah, he became just unknown.
Yeah.
He just became unknown in the whole narrative. So I felt this boy is like mine. I have a daughter named Sarah. She's 3.5 years old. And I felt that he is my boy as well. And if my boy is lost, I would like people to know who he was, how he lived, what he was dreaming of. So I started to collect these data, and I wanted to make the interviews. So in this particular attack, I decided to write 4 stories, despite that I can write about the other 17 people killed. And this is the trauma of being a writer and being a journalist, is that you have to put these stories on a scale of being influential, being relevant, etc., to get the readers to understand, to get them close to understand what is actually happening.
Must be very difficult.
It is. This is actually the nightmare of writing a book or writing a story on Gaza. It's just you have to make preferences. You have to leave a child and to pick another to write story on. You have to leave a grieving mother and select another person to have the interview with, because
which story will be heard, which story will be known.
Exactly.
Which person will be remembered.
It feels an emotional burden that you have to prioritize.
Yeah.
It's very traumatizing, and I sometimes after writing certain stories, I spend weeks dealing with this sense of guilt that I have chosen this story, not the other story, and I can't write about the other story because I can't write.
Not enough
thousands
capacity.
Of books.
You can't do all
Exactly.
of that by yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is a shared struggle among writers and journalists in Gaza, is that they have to select, they have to prioritize, they have to convince with the selection of their stories. So I've written about the coffee boy. I've written about another boy named Nuh al-Sagga. A day before the airstrike on 7th of May, he celebrated his 10th birthday. His birthday was on May 5th, but his father promised him, Dawood, promised him to make him a birthday cake the next day, May 6th. And they have celebrated this birthday together. He gathered, he basically invited every child in his neighborhood, his friends, his cousins, his uncles. So they had a celebration, and I believe the video of the father celebrating the birthday, there is no electricity, just a few candles, and they were celebrating, despite that in that video as well, you can hear the bombings in the background. So when I saw that video, it's the same guilt. I felt that he is also my son, and I have to write about him. So I started interviewing people through some friends in Gaza, and this was like just something else. Like years and years of experience, they can't save you from the emotional trauma afterwards. The smallest details of Noah waking up in the morning, playing with his small chicks, and bargaining with his mother that he wants milk, he does not want a can of sardine, and his excitement of the money of his birthday, the gifts, which he earned 170 shekels.
Oh.
He kept it 20 with him and gave 150 to his mother to keep it for him. These smallest details, they mean the world to me.
Yeah, the finest details that you remember about someone else.
Yeah, they mean the world to me.
So close
the coffee
to them.
boy used to kiss his father's cheek before him leaving. He said the left side, but the day he was killed, he kissed both sides.
Oh.
Everybody calling the coffee boy champion. Everybody loved him. He had a dream of becoming an architect. So there is a lot. There is a lot of these stories that could bring you to your knees and just cry. For Nuh himself, because I think this is maybe the most difficult story that I've worked on, and not to give preferences, but I felt very close to this boy from his father's words. We did the interview. I've written almost 13 pages from this testimony. His father remembers everything as it happened like a few minutes ago. It was very terrifying to me that someone can remember that much.
Yeah, his son.
And dealing with all these details, it's just too difficult. And when I started to write the story, if I have in the original draft of the interview itself, I have 13 pages. That means I'll go beyond 13 in my English draft. And because I have to put the reader in the many absent aspects of life in Gaza. There are no cakes. Why there are no cakes?
Yeah.
They can't do celebrations because there is no electricity. Why there is no electricity? There is a lot of missing aspects because of the whole concept of media not showing how life is in Gaza.
Yeah.
But actually, I didn't care. So I started just writing as the story as it is in the testimony. So this is like the final part of Nuh's story, narrated by his father. I only had like to do some wordings, and I've just let everything as it is. It says the corridor in the ER was wet with blood. He couldn't place his feet without stepping into it. Stretchers overflow. People screamed names, pleaded with nurses, lifted sheets, only to collapse. He searched again, more bodies, no sign of Nuh. Not in one room, not in two, not in three. You imagine, he said later, a father working through a hospital looking for his son in the bodies. He begged nurses and pleaded with security. Please, have you seen my boy? 10 years old, with fluffy hair, shorts to the knees, a shirt. Please. They shook their heads. We don't know. Maybe try the ICU. But the ICU was locked. Guards were refusing entry. Too crowded, they said. Too critical. He pleaded with the staff. Please just let me look. Eventually, a man took pity and let him into the ICU. Dawood walked from room to room. Every corner held something broken. Some of it still breathing. I checked the same faces again and again, he said. I was looking, but I didn't know what for. Then a nurse said, Is your son about 10 cute with long hair and wearing shorts? Dawood's stomach dropped. He's in the next room to you, the nurse muttered. Dawood rushed in. His wife, who also arrived by then, trailed him behind. They had searched this room before, but hadn't seen him. He had been hidden beneath a tangle of stretchers of bodies. Nuh lay on the floor. Blood had dried in his hair. His face was pale, lips parted slightly. Dawood dropped to his knees. The doctor gently said, Youth delivered him into death. The skull shattered, no breath. He explained it clinically. His father nodded. He kissed his son's forehead. He bent and prayed, voice broken for mercy or witness. Dawood leaned close. Nuh. He reached for his hand, icy and unmoving. He pressed his ear to his chest. There was no pulse. I am with you, he whispered. I am here. I love you. But there was nothing left to hear. His body was cold. He lay silent, blood pooling beneath him. Nearby lay children, some younger, some older, siblings, neighbors, strangers, all cut off by the same strike. The boy did not move. Say something, Dawood pleaded. Just one word. Say Baba. Just once.
Oh my God.
After this particular story, I remember spending 3 weeks not able to write a single word. I couldn't just, and I kept having nightmares for long nights because of the trauma from, keeping these words in my mind, just to give them the just way of how to write them. And it actually broke me. It broke me to many levels that I couldn't write for 3 weeks. And I sent a message to the father after writing the story. I didn't actually know how to write him a message. What kind of message I should send a father, a grieving father, who a day before he celebrated his son's birthday, and he was hugging them in a video. His sister documented, he was basically hugging his son and being tight on his hugs, etc. So his sister of Dawood told him, "Why you're hugging so tight? You feel like you're saying goodbye." He said, "No. I've been like busy in the past few days. I didn't have the time to love him as I should."
Oh God.
And the very next day, on the 7th of May, in the afternoon, Noor decided to go to buy some chips, which he told his mother that he's going to buy some chips to give her some out of the 20 shekels that he took from his the money of the gifts of his birthday. He went, but he never returned.
Oh God.
So yeah, I tried to write the story as it is. Couldn't care less of how long it is.
It's fine. It's our responsibility to share the stories of
Yeah,
the people you saw, the people who lived their dreams, and every detail about them. And it's the least we can do.
yeah.
It must have been very difficult.
It is
And
very difficult.
I know we can spend hours talking about Dawood, or even talking about any of other people that you have met in Gaza. And it's our responsibility to do that. Could you tell me a little bit more about, you're a journalist, you work with the Associated Press, with the Jazeera English, and you've seen how the media have been dealing or understanding the Palestinians before and even within the genocide. So what do you think, what the Western media failed to understand or, chose not to understand about Palestine and Gaza?
I think this is a very important question, and every issue on Palestine stems from this gap of understanding. I would like also to call it's not an unintentional misunderstanding of how they perceive, of how they frame the Palestinian, that it has been going since 1948, to be more accurate, or even way before that. This kind of gap that I would say colonial system used to frame and undermine the rights of those people who are being colonized under occupation. It is a constant and regular, dehumanizations in each period and afterwards. For as long as I can remember, Gazans have been manifested in Western media in particular as less humans than the Israeli civilians, for example. And not only that, even if we put in the framework of nowadays politics, if you compare it to what the Gazans are currently suffering to the Ukrainians, for instance, you will find a lot of differences and variations in the written language, in the frameworks of these lives, in the news, and treating Palestinians as means of numbers of homes bombed, numbers of of people died, and when it comes to Ukrainians, you will definitely find more human stories, more intimacy in these stories of families, of parents, of children, of similarly attacks on hospitals and schools being documented utterly from a human perspective. But this perspective is entirely absent when it comes to the story of the Gazans. It is so unfortunate because, as a journalist, I have not studied journalism from a theoretical aspects, but I have learned it in the hardest ways through work experience, being in the situation of airstrikes and receiving the casualties and talking to them. So what I can understand from these experiences is that every life matters. A Palestinian, a Ukrainian, a Syrian, a Libyan. These are civilians, and when it comes to reporting, we should rely on similar standards of how to report on them. So when I work with colleagues of different platforms and different agencies, not only with the Associated Press and Jazeera English, because I've written to many others, and I noticed the same underestimation of Palestinian lives whenever we're documenting an aftermath of an airstrike, and there is a great number of casualties, including women and children. And I tend to hate to say women and children because also young men, they deserve to be mentioned in that particular context. But when I, in the process of writing and going through the editorial process, you can find a lot of disappearances of how they treat these narratives and how they treat these casualties in comparison to what I already know of how they treat other narratives in other political discourses. So this sort of like, I would call it ideology, to be honest. This sort of ideology, it is very disturbing to me as a journalist, and above all, it's very disturbing to me as a human because I I can testify as a human of how these cycles of violence affecting human lives, and that's why it's 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 the journalist's responsibility. First responsibility is to document these events as they are, to give them as much human aspects as it should, because I joined journalism in the first place believing that my work and the work of journalism entirely could bring justice at some point, because these stories will be written, more people will be calling out these actions, and in hope that accountability is taking place. That's why I joined journalism. I basically, before, I used to write myself, not believing, because I had a belief back then, and I believe in it, that media is utterly controlled by bigger powers of money, and industries most likely being controlled by big agencies, and countries who are most likely trying to control, like the US right now controlling media agencies, and how they like show President Trump and his policies, etc. So starting from this belief in journalism that it could bring justice to those whom their voices are absent. But these years have learned me the hard way that it's not as I hoped for. And that's why I made an unfortunate and a huge disconnect in my professional career. I decided to quit journalism, and I decided to shift it a little bit in like, I have faith in writing, because writing will be there even after I die, or after these casualties are numbered. For those who care, they will find these stories at some point. If they do actually care, they will afterwards take actions to trying to bring justice in place, and that's why I decided to write in the first place.
Yeah. I can totally understand watching the Western media while I was here in the UK. I saw them calling young girls, like 3, 4, or 6-year-olds, ladies or women, while calling the Israeli soldiers who are serving at Israeli army, and they're like men, calling them teenagers.
Yeah.
So they have that all of editorial things, which I would like to ask you about. You told me about the fear of Israeli backlash. How does the newsroom deal with all the news coming from Gaza, from the editorial decisions to the choice of words and vocabulary that they use, but also the choice of stories, which stories to show, which stories to overshadow, and which to soften. Could you tell us more about that? How that actually happens in practice?
I think it's now becoming very vivid picture of how the media is definitely controlling how the narratives are written, and the selectivity of these stories. And I like to call it selectivity, because when you have like a tsunami of stories in each day and each event in the aftermath of airstrikes, you will find hundreds of stories to be writing on. And in my own experience, I've been in these positions of negotiations of how to use this vocabulary, why to describe certain events as kind of like children being written about like an adult. So I've been into these arguments countless of times, trying to argue what could be proper and what is proper, because when it comes to expertise in describing these events, it should be the first-hand expertise of people living in Gaza. So it starts with discrediting and looking at the Palestinian journalists working in Western media platforms or agencies being looked at as a second class, workers and employees. Like their expertise are not being taken into consideration firsthand, despite the fact they're not only reporting on these events from far away, they're living these circumstances. So these words they are trying to hand to the desk or the newsroom, they're not empty words. They're not words of vocabulary or aesthetic of these stories, but they are real events taking place. They are living these events, and they could be one of the casualties of these potential events taking place in the future. So it starts from these newsrooms dealing with employees, Palestinian employees, as less credible as the rest of the employees. it's not my own experience, not only my own experience. This is a common feeling shared between all the friends that I've talked to working for media, Western media agencies. They have expressed similar frustration and kind of, I would like to call it suppression of their voices as Palestinians. Like, these newsrooms would like them to treat the matter of reporting from Gaza, for instance, as a professional matter, despite the fact it's the professionalism in the first place is taking the credit of their voices as honest as they are, because they are the people who are living these conditions. So it starts from that point. So from these arguments about the vocabulary and the language, I think it's fair to say that even the language, like just, generally saying that even the language has failed what is actually taking place in Gaza. It's not a matter of description of a genocide, a war, or a conflict. You can describe it whatever you would like to describe, but when it comes to the particularities of each story, it's very vivid. When you talk about most of the Israeli airstrikes, if not all of them, you talk about more than 2/3 of them. You can find children and women. So it's not happening spontaneously. It's not happening because of a chaos. It's happening because of a systematic targeting of civilian infrastructure. It's not just an airstrike or 2 or 3 or 10 or 100. In each airstrike, you can find at least half of the casualties are women and children. Yeah. So when you get to the fact as a journalist that these airstrikes are resulting in such civilian casualties, it's not spontaneous. So when you are dealing with this matter as it's happening because of a mistake, because of an error, because of they are targeting Hamas militants, for instance, you are actually making a huge aspect of the story missing, which is these attacks are causing half of the casualties to be women and children. And I used to even to argue these aspects of why you're talking about, like, for all of the Western agencies, whenever they are writing about the human casualties in Gaza, they state the numbers, for example, and they say, and part of them, and a number of them, they are women and children. So I used to argue that. Why you're writing about women? Why you say women and children? Yeah. Why you are trying to dehumanize these young men whom their lives were cut short because of these airstrikes? So it starts with that, actually. And then I started to realize, because of the prescription or the assumption that these young men could be Hamas militants, for example, but you're not sure. You have not vetted this information. You have not verified this information that you could say that these young men are terrorists or whatever you would like to describe them. So basically, what are you fearing of? So I started to like many questions started to pop up in my mind. What are you fearing from? If you're not like a massive agency or a big Western platform that people rely on for accurate information, and you call for neutrality of journalistic work, but you are intentionally and unintentionally making many of the aspects of the story missing.
Interesting. They do
so
that.
So in each story and another, more questions pop up in my mind.
Yeah.
Why this is happening? And through these arguments and discussions, I became to realize it's not about me in the process being considered a second-class employee. It's not about my manager, for example, or the newsroom itself, but it's more of a policy of Western media fearing the backlash of the Israeli government. And the intimidation that we, usually the Palestinians, are being under pressure. As far as I can remember, most of the journalists in Gaza who worked for the big Western media platforms, they've been under smearing campaigns to discredit their voices, to put their agencies under pressure, to influence the narration of these stories, to influence the selectivity of these stories, and also to impact the outcome of this big agency's work, which could influence millions and millions of people's understandings about the situation of Gaza.
Yeah. So we're talking about attacking of journalists, not just like physically by killing them, but
Yes.
also their own work.
Yeah.
Could you like elaborate on that more and tell me like what experiences those journalists had? You said about the smearing campaigns. So what does the media outlet do if their own journalists were smeared?
So in most of the cases that I'm aware of, like talking with friends who've been under, a campaign of smearing campaign by the
Yeah.
Israeli government or the Israeli organizations,
Yes.
basically trying to support the Israeli government actions taking place in Gaza, they basically claiming that the journalists having ties with Hamas. This is like the first and most, common claims that they usually do. And this journalist, they most likely doubt this journalist's integrity of reporting on Gaza and Israel, as they state most likely. And out of these claims, they sometimes take old posts, could be 10 years ago even, from the social platforms, and we talk about here about the freedom of expression.
Yeah.
They sometimes take from these old posts on a private accounts, journalists' private accounts, and they're trying to justify of calling this journalist being anti-Israel, being anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic.
Anti-Semitic, yeah.
So yeah, out of these, many discussions could be conducted with the journalist himself or herself about the honesty of reporting, despite these journalists most likely having years and years of reporting within these agencies, and it's just there is an absence of trust between the journalist himself and the employer. It starts with processes could be taken against the journalist, that his byline or her byline could be absent.
Oh.
It could influence his opinion in certain matters or investigations or topic selections or priorities of reportings, despite that he or she could be the only reporter or the only journalist could be working in Gaza with this agency. So what I'm trying to say here is it feels like a system. And Palestinians who are working with Western agencies, they are most likely being considered untrusted, discredited, and their opinions are also rechecked again and again to verify that this agency is not publishing like news 100% relying on Palestinian testimonies or the Palestinian journalists' work, but they have to vet these information through other sources, trying to make sure that every piece of news or every aspect of story is written in a sense of accuracy, that it would not receive a backlash from these organizations. This kind of pressure laid over these agencies, it creates unjust policies towards the Palestinian workers. They know it. And then trust me when I tell you, they know it happens, but they can't change it.
Do they protect their journalists in any way? So I know that they don't protect them on the ground if Israel is gonna like bomb them or target them. They don't do that. But do they protect them from those campaigns, from defamation and those sort of attacks?
I mean, to my knowledge, I don't think there is any that could be done to defend these journalists. Just to be more accurate, because when this smearing campaign starts, they start publishing everywhere, and these campaigns. I mean, it's not the campaigns that are terrifying, but it's the aftermath of these campaigns, which leading sometimes to the Israeli soldiers, to the Israeli civilians as well, approaching these journalists and endangering their lives, threatening to rape their wives, threatening to kill them. And this is something that I believe most of the journalists working in Gaza have been under. This is the most terrifying part. If you are being called by the Israeli military that they know about you, they're threatening if you're writing something about the events taking place in Gaza, you could be targeted. This happened to many of colleagues that I have known in person in Gaza and I've worked with in these past years during this war, during the previous wars as well. This has been like a constant nightmare for the journalists in Gaza. I mean, these agencies know they happen, but they can't forbid it from happening. They can't even protect the journalists on the ground if Israeli airstrikes somehow, I would call it mistakenly targeting their locations, as it happened inside Al-Aqsa Hospital in the middle sides of Gaza. Many airstrikes took place close to the journalists' tents inside the hospital, which could, and it killed, it's not
killed,
good,
yeah.
it
Yeah.
killed many journalists that I have known, and it endangered the lives of other hundreds of journalists. Has any accountability been taken since then? No. Any condemnation? No. So even to my own experience, we usually, like working for the Associated Press, for example, like my coordinates are usually taken to protect that the Israeli military knows where I am, including all the other colleagues. So if there is anything that could endanger our life, our agencies are usually notified by these endangers to ask us to evacuate the proximity of these areas. And at one night in my home, my very next neighbor was targeted. He was an electrician working for the electricity company in Gaza. And we were lucky to have few injuries among the family members. And at that point, it was very shocking to me because this is my first experience working for the Associated Press, and I was guaranteed by my agency that our safety is somehow guaranteed in this war. And I regularly keep my GPS active to keep them updated in the loop that I am here, I am there, I am at home, to keep updating the Israeli army in cases in these cases. And it was shocking because this airstrike resulted in the killing of 7 of my neighbors. And a few members of my family were injured, and some of my nephews and they were lucky to survive from the wounds, because I've seen hundreds of shrapnels hitting the wall of their room. So it was a miracle that we survived at that point. But even to the agency itself, they couldn't do anything to protect us, despite the processes and the security processes that we undergo of coordinates sent. Protection should be maintained. You have to wear your vest, your helmet, etc. during the work. But there is no safety at all for journalists in Gaza. This is something that we can witness in the number of casualties among journalists and paramedics and doctors, and it's terrifying to realize during this war in particular, to realize that wearing a helmet or vest written press on it, it's just another crosshair on you that you could be targeted because of it.
True.
So it's devastating, it's appalling on various levels to realize that nobody can do anything about it. So I started to question, is it because we're being Palestinians? Is it because of the long decades of dehumanization that the Palestinians have been suffering?
So even protected groups as journalists and doctors have become a target.
Yeah, exactly.
Rather than a protected.
Is it that easy to tolerate the targeting of should be protected
group,
personnel like journalists, medics, civil defense workers? So at that point, I've actually reconsidered everything about journalism. It's not about my safety, but it's more than about the safety of my family, because I know if they intend to target me, as they did to many colleagues, it's not they will target me alone. They will target me with other, tens and potentially hundreds in each house, because we've been crammed into the city of Rafah, my city, because of the Israeli evacuation orders. So I started to reconsider everything about journalism, safety, truth, narrative, because it becomes absurd at that point to realize that my work, my voice, my professionalism, my so-called neutrality means nothing in the face of the Israeli policies of constant targeting of journalists, for example.
So there's like a duality between the Western media that doesn't even allow the authentic voice to be out, the reality, the journalistic work to be published and going viral and all of that. And then you have at the same time the threats of being targeted along with your own family.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult decision. I know multiple journalists who had to make the decision of continuing
Yeah.
reporting, although they know about this, and also others who had to, give up.
What do you expect? I'm not trying to blame journalists who decided to quit their work. I utterly understand where this is coming from. And sometimes in my personal talks, I'm not going to hide my words. I sometimes advise some of the friends who've been under, smearing campaigns just to stop working because nobody can protect them. And whenever the Israeli army is claiming someone someone to have ties with Hamas, for example, there is nothing on earth that could protect them. So it comes from this harsh realization that we're not being protected, but it's on the contrary. Being a journalist is just another threat.
Yeah.
And it's not only endangering our lives, and just to many of the journalists in Gaza, they would gladly sacrifice their lives for the cause of their journalism. But it's more about the families. It's more about the children they have to protect. So it's a hard decision. I realized how hard it is out of my personal experiences with some of the friends that the Israeli administration smeared and claimed they have ties with Hamas, despite I've known these people for the last almost 20 years. So it's so unfortunate. It's so unfortunate. There is no one that can actually look into these Israeli claims and also look into the previous claims of the targeted journalist killed and to somehow to bring accountability when it comes to especially targeting those should be protected personnel in Gaza. It's not far from what is actually taking place against the civilians of Gaza. There is no any kind of accountability that is currently taking place. So it somehow feels it's becoming normal, and their death, unfortunately, somehow means nothing.
It's very difficult. I can't imagine how journalists can go through those challenges and keep working. I remember one of the journalists I met who was working in Palestine years ago. He told me that he faced something very weird about the international media, which is that, whenever there is a journalistic story or a news story or something like investigative report or something, media outlets will run and race to get that story and publish it at first. But in his experience, it wasn't like that. And I remember that you were the first to report and do investigative report on Hind Rajab, this 6-year-old child, everyone know right now, that Israel have targeted. But again, the story didn't go out the first. The Reuters report went first. So what happened in between? Why wasn't the investigative report out on time?
I think it's an overall intimidation that they could be under because of the Israeli backlash.
Yeah.
I understand that the urgency of these events might affect the data collection process, because some of these events, like for the instance of Hind Rajab in particular, we have known little about, for example, the location and who is she with, the number of the family members inside the car. So we faced a lot of question marks to properly publish a story on that particular event. But we used to, in similar events, we go for the hard news, like publishing 2 sentences, 3 sentences that this event is taking place. And we tend to ask the Israeli army, providing them with the coordinates, that we have credible reports that this event is taking place in these coordinates. And what is your response to that? We ask external sources like the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, for example, because they've been the party who notified me of the instance in the first place. So when I collected at that particular story, when I collected an overall sufficient data that this information is accurate, and this story is currently, we don't know the whereabouts of the girl. We don't know if she's alive or dead. The last call she had with her family, the girl seemed to be bleeding. Her cousin Leanne, as I remember her, the girl said something about her being dead. Layan was the first to talk with the Palestinian society,
Crescent,
with the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, and then Hind. So there was a confusion on if the girl is alive or not. So what I tried to do at that point is I tried to pressure with this story in order to understand the whereabouts of the girl, if she's alive, if she's dead, so we can make an overall picture, a story, a whole story, particularly on the death or in the story of Hind Rajab. I hoped at that point that she's alive, but we had no response from the Israeli military at that point. They did not approve the coordinates. They said that the area is designated as red zone, means it's a zone of combat.
Yeah.
We do not have access. We definitely cannot have access to the territory, even as international journalists, as international agency. So we can't actually verify the certainty of these data. So I tried to pressure with this story in order to understand more, because we basically have to pressure the Israeli military. We do that with certain exclusive reports, investigations. We do pressure the Israeli army to try to understand what actually happened in these events. And for most of these events, we are usually left with no responses, no information given, and no acknowledgement of these instances, like, for example, executions taking place, executions of people raising the white flag, executions of civilians. I did some of these reports, and when we asked the Israeli army at first, they denied acknowledgement of the incident. Then it becomes they're investigating the incident. This is the long process, and it takes months until the story is somehow melts among thousands and thousands of stories, and it becomes, unfortunately, irrelevant to the Western readers to know or to follow the details afterwards. So this is not particularly in the event of Hind Rajab, but it's an overall accumulation of reports, many reports that we might have written each day about similar events taking place, of targeting of places or homes or residential towers that we know, for example, we can verify through residents there that there are no militants. We ask the Israeli military why they've targeted this, no responses. So it becomes like a regular process, causing much hesitation to go forward, bravely saying that Israel has no justification to target this civilian or to execute this women, or this kind of recognition or this kind of acknowledgement, utterly said after months of waiting for the Israeli army, for example, to respond. Or we call it in other ways, in other ways we call it the cross verification. Sometimes it's tend to be when the casualties are civilians of Gaza. I feel it's just exaggerated to the extent these stories are just melting in the process. They became irrelevant, and they just disappear among the piles and piles of other stories and the agency of different stories.
This hesitation and taking so much time on details and cross-verification, is it like a standard thing for the media agency? So they do that if the news on Israel, if the news on Gaza, if the news in other places, or is just unique for the Gaza situation?
No. It's an editorial, it's a journalistic process. It should, every story that will be published should undergo this sort of cross-verification, vetting of sources, and many other processes. But what I'm trying to shed the light on here is that cross-verification might be sometimes very lengthy, and sometimes it just, the result of this cross-verification with Israeli military, for example. 99 of the cases we ask for them to respond, they just don't. So when you have this evidence of a procrastination to get accurate data or accurate responses, I don't want to call it data. And when it comes to Gaza itself, This kind of hesitation is also resulted from the fact that we as journalists, we don't have access most of the times to these areas where these events are taking place, because the Israeli army will not allow us to conduct our work properly in these territories, especially the red combat zones. So it becomes like from multiple sides that this procrastination becomes like a system. These stories is somehow disappearing through.
Okay, interesting. Because,
no matter how hard we try to push for the agency of these stories, sometimes these editorial processes are making it very complicated to the extent that these stories are becoming irrelevant. So I question, is it really a system that these stories are meant to be published with agency to get a sense of pressure on the Israeli side to reveal some of the data or to get proper answers that we most likely don't get even after months and months of waiting? So what is the benefit of all of this lengthy process?
It's very interesting because, after the 7th of October, we saw Western media outlets covering on, news and information that were confirmed lies after that. So were there like cross-verification of those cases? Because they were like published immediately. They didn't wait for days or, let's say, months in our cases to verify those cases. And it has been proven that they were lies. They were not actually things that
I think it's very...
So do they have that double standards? And
I think it's very ironic to think about it, because we've read tons of news coming out from Israel and the aftermath of the 7th of October attacks, that not only the Israeli media, but also the Western media rushed to conclusions. I did not personally contribute into the process of these cross-verifications, but it raises a lot of questions over the ethical considerations that are taken in these reportings in comparison to Gaza. I wanted to ask these questions professionally, but it's just a matter, these stories are in front of us, reading a lot of misinformation, turned out to be by the Israeli media itself denying the majority of these stories. And most of these agencies are taking down their publications, and not a single apology. Not a single apology was issued before. So if you are contributing to this misinformation that led to somehow normalizing the death in Gaza in the aftermath of the 7th of October, and you have not issued any apology, so it raises questions over your ethical considerations of reporting. Because if you are actually doing long process of a cross-verification over the stories of Gaza, civilians in Gaza, I mean, it's just a matter of simple question, why you're not doing the same? If it is an ethical standard, why it's not being adopted in these two narratives? So there is a huge, missing answers.
Okay. I totally understand, and I understand why those frustrations, all of them, might be the reason behind why you don't believe in journalism anymore. We're happy that we had you today, Issam. It's our privilege to have a Palestinian journalist from inside Gaza, to have such strong and powerful testimony of everything that you went through, the struggles, the professional and personal struggles of writing a story, of, speaking about a story also, not just writing about it and feeling it. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for being with us. It's been a privilege, and I hope other journalists internationally will just learn to be as you and other journalists in Gaza, to show the dedication, honesty, transparency, and professionalism. Thank you so much.
Thank you for
your
having me.
time.